My name's Ken Rayner, as Al said, VK2BBQ. I'll be talking about G5RV antenna, mainly from a practical point of view rather than from a theoretical point of view. I've been using the G5RV now for a substantial number of years, shall we say, and found it quite an effective antenna from my personal point of view. It is a multi-band antenna. It's not a half-wave dipole that's been modified. It's a 3 half-wave antenna, which uses a special feeder line. How many of you are familiar with G5RVs? Okay, quite a number, but there's quite a number also who haven't really got involved with it before. In my bag of magical tricks, as Al said, I carry my G5RV with me everywhere. Look at that. I have one in here as well. So this is one that I got from Oasis quite some time ago. And it essentially looks like a dipole with a TV antenna type open feed length on it as well. So it has the 2 radiating arms. So it looks like a standard dipole, although it's not. It's an extended antenna, and it uses a special feed line of a special length in order to achieve multi-band operations. So I've used this antenna. It's originally designed for 20 metres, but it also works on 40 and 80 really well. Now this is a standard G5RV. There's also a senior G5RV which operates on 160 metres, but there's also a junior which operates 20, 40, 10 metres basically. It's a good multi-band antenna. It's compromised. It's not a single dipole antenna as you might experience on a single band antenna, but it's a pretty good compromise. Might just like to pass that round and everyone can have a bit of a look at it. That's it. Thanks very much. Okay, so that's a bit on my background. My background is that I use it for contesting. I use it at a mate's farm, or I have been using it on a mate's farm. I haven't been active in amateur radio now for about 18 months due to work and study matters. So I haven't been using it lately. So I'm a little bit rusty on some of its operations. But I've been using it mainly for contesting. So I didn't get into amateur radio with the idea of contesting. I originally got involved many thousands of years ago because I was interested actually in television. And I needed a license in order to experiment with television, analogue television as it was in those days. It wasn't until I got into the first contest that I actually started to get involved with it. It's a good contesting antenna, this one, mainly because you can operate more than one band on it. I use it very regularly you have used it very regularly on 40 metres and 80 metres. They're the 2 primary bands that I've used it on. It's designed for 20 metres, but I haven't been that successful with 20 metres, although it has been good on 20 metres, but I find it very good for 40 metres and 80 metres. The background to this particular antenna is that it was... change channels. So the history is that this antenna was designed by Lewis Barney in the UK. He's now Silent Key, rest in peace. He designed it for 20 metres. He designed it so that it could operate within a very limited area. The length of the antenna is 30 metres, and that means that that's 30 metres length to length, 10 metre roughly feed line, not feed line, impedance line. But in fact it operates, because of its operation with the impedance line, it will operate across multi-bands. He designed it because he had limited space, and it operates in a very limited space area. It is an antenna that does need a bit of height. It needs roughly half wavelength height in order to operate. So if you're operating on, say, 20 metres, it needs 10 metres in the air. If you're running it on 80 metres, then it needs a little bit more. So where I'm running it at the moment, it's probably sitting 25, 30 metres up in the air. I'm running it on a farm, so I'm stringing it up in trees for the contest, so I'm running portable. It's a very easy, it's a light antenna. As you can see from the antenna that's coming around now, it's not something which is particularly heavy. It's not hard to string her up in a tree and to run. It's centre fed, and being centre fed, that means that the radiation is essentially coming out of the centre, and the critical height on these antennas is in the centre, where the centre fed is, because that's where most of the radiating occurs. The end sixth of the antenna length is not doing a huge amount, and can actually be dog-legged. I've dog-legged these things without any problems at all. So it goes up in the trees. It's sitting probably about 25 metres anyway, up in the air. I get it up there with using a bow and arrow. And VK2BBQ donated one, and FIRN donated a bow and arrow to me, and it helps me get the antenna up in the tree with a fishing line. But where I'm operating also is up about 750 metres above sea level, and the water table is fairly low. So it's a very rocky area that I'm operating in. There's not a lot of soil. It's not a farm as such. It's laughingly called a farm, but it's really not wouldn't qualify as being agricultural, because there's no soil of any use on it. So that means the water table is pretty low there. So the effective height above the water table is actually very high. So the height doesn't need to be too outstanding in order to operate it. You'll see there that that's the stretched out version of the antenna. Across here is the central radiating area, but it uses this as a one-to-one impedance. So what happens is when it's operating on different frequencies, different bands, essentially this impedance area here, the feeder line, becomes part of the antenna. So rather than having to stretch out the antenna for the full 1.5 wavelengths, the wave works around the feed line. So that has the advantage that it's a shorter antenna, but it also means that there's going to be, that on various bands, there'll also be, unfortunately, reactance involved in the signal as well. The feed point down the bottom here has an effective impedance of 50 to 80 ohms, thereabouts, depending upon the band, but it can be quite high. The operation of these antennas can be done on a feed line of variable length, so it doesn't have a fixed feed line length, although there's a little bit of debate about that. But also, because of the reactance, I put a balun on, an ugly balun on at the antenna matching unit, which is right at the radio. So I put a baling on to prevent some of that reactance coming back down towards the poor old radio.
I've seen a model, could have been the original model, where
It wasn't from me.
where you basically loop the feed line.
Yep.
And there's your balun.
Yeah.
You know.
And so the ugly balun is just as Rafi said. It's I just use an old water bottle, and I wrap around about 18 turns, 17 turns, just around an empty water bottle, which I'm using as a former, and that works extremely well. So I have any number of those. If you want to use a beer bottle, an empty beer bottle, then that's fine as well. I have used those before as well, under emergency circumstances, of course. Okay, so it was invented by Lewis Barney. It's a compromise antenna, multi-band coverage with antenna matcher. So I always use on HF. I always use antenna matching unit anyway. I've used the Kenwood AT200 with great success. It's a manual, but because I'm using usually an FT897, but I also use an IC7000, neither of which have got automatic antenna tuners on them, and they have a maximum output of about 100 watts. Normally I will run under the 100 watts. I'll probably run at about 75, 80 watts. Something like that. This antenna has no problems reaching VK7, VK5, VK4, VK7, ZLs. Has no problems reaching those areas with great clarity on 70, 80 watts. Matter of fact, I've received signals, particularly from, say, VK5 from South Australia, who are running on 5 watts, 10 watts. I remember one time I was listening to, I was in the contest, I was picking up an F call who was running 10 watts, clear as a bell. So the antenna's very good from that point of view. It is non-directional essentially. Has some slight directionality attached to it, but really I've run them north, south, east, west. I normally run 2 antennas out at the farm. One runs north, south, one runs east, west. There's no discernible difference really between the signals on them. So they're quite good from that point of view. I have put a senior up. Now the senior will run the same bands as the standard GR5E, except it's into the 160 metres, and unfortunately I haven't had much time to play with that, as because I've been out of things for about 18 months, unfortunately. But it should also be a good antenna. Now I've also forced this thing onto 160 metres, not overly successfully, but it will do it. Got to be very careful when you're doing your antenna matching, of course. And it's always when using antenna matching units, antenna ATUs, you also need to make sure that you don't travel too far up and down the band before resetting them. Yep.
Where you're going to bring in trees and whatever, but you got the distance. What's your practical minimum height for your centre point?
Minimum practical height is going to be 10 metres.
Oh, okay.
So that's half your wavelength for 20 metres. Having said that, if you're in a fairly dry area, there's no reason why you can't use the higher bands on that. I've had it 15 metres, 20 metres in the air.
About 80 and 40, yeah.
On 80 and 40, yeah, no problems.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're down low in the flats, I had one place I went to which was very low, and the ground was quite damp, and it didn't work too well there. It was, I think it was radiating mainly up. I think if I'd been doing EME, you know, if I'd been aiming at the moon, I would have been okay. Yep.
You said the junior is good for 10, 20, 40.
Yep.
And the senior is for 160, good on 160. What's the standard good for?
The standard is good for 80, 40, 20, 10. You can use it on the WARC bands. I wouldn't go any further than 10 metres. And the senior will cover 160 metres plus all the bands that the standard will do as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so multi-band coverage with antenna matcher. General configuration is a horizontal configuration, but as I said, if you want to use it as an inverted V, that's no problems with that. Just make sure the most important part is to have the centre feed as high as possible. The legs, if they come down, I've had the legs down to 2 or 3 metres above the ground. It doesn't seem to affect it at all. Hasn't blown the radio up, no smoke anywhere. You can also use it as a slope. You can use it as a dog leg as well. I've been in situations where basically I've had it dog legged at 90 degrees and it still runs quite well. So it's quite a robust antenna and it's a quite forgiving antenna as well. Okay, but typically they will operate as a flat top, so they're in horizontal mode. They've got it strung out between two trees. Typically I'll have the centre feed on a tree and I'll have 2 other trees for the mains. Again, sloping quite a bit.
So you run the centre feed up the trunk, do you?
Yep, sure do.
Very convenient if you've got trees placed, you see.
Well, where I am, there's no shortage of trees, shall we say.
What's the other problem?
We've got something like 400 acres of trees.
You're lucky.
Absolutely. So even if you haven't got trees, we've got antenna masts that I've used these on as well. So of course, once you get past about 10 metres on antenna masks, it becomes a little bit unwieldy to actually do it on. But you can certainly do it on that basis, and then you just run the arms down as high as you can get them. But the idea would be, don't panic if they get too low. So it's a good antenna for particularly people who are beginning in the hobby because it's quite forgiving. It's not specific to its location, but it's also good for contesting because it's so easy to switch bands. As soon as 40 metres dies from in the afternoon as you're cooking dinner, you just switch it over onto 80 metres, retune the ATU, and then again it runs quite well. It is temperature dependent, but not greatly. So the temperature fluctuations during the day don't really impact it. So you can tune it up and run it for an hour or 2 before you have to worry about even looking at retuning it. At night time, a little bit different because the cool air does tend to get into it a little bit, but even so, it's not like the retuning. I'd probably retune once an hour, maybe once every couple of hours, even so, just to allow for the thermal changes in the antenna structure. There's our inverted V setup. Typically, I'll either use the flat top with the centre feed on a tree, or I'll run it inverted down to, as I said before, 3 or 4 metres. It's as I said, it's quite a forgiving antenna, and it's quite easy to get most of VK and ZL areas without too much difficulty. I have used it on international DXs. I was in All Asian contest a couple of years ago. It worked. It worked Japan and Japan. There was a US station, and I think there was a Ukraine station as well that I worked. But I think the air gods, the ether gods, might have been fairly kind to me that particular night. On particularly running 100 watts or less. Speaking of wattage, the antenna will take quite a bit of wattage. It'll take the full legal, 450 watts. If you want to pump 1,000 watts into it, I don't know how she works on that basis because I've never done it. So,
Can I ask a question?
yep.
In a contest, often you have multiple stations near each other. How does that perform? If you're in a group of people, would you be interfering?
Sorry, in close stations?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a series of band pass filters. I mean, typically I operate as a single station, but I have operated with multiple stations. You know, Al and Irene were on site one time, and I use band pass filters as a standard, so they will interfere with each other. And I remember my very first contest. We weren't using a G5RV, we were using an end-fed Zeppelin, and which is probably not that different in terms of harmonics, and there was a bit of backwards and forwards interference there as well. But I'd recommend band pass filters regardless of the quality of the antenna. So you'll see here the theory of the operation, and I don't want to get into too much theory because that's not my forte. My forte is in the practical application, and that's really what we're talking about here today, is that it will operate the full length of the arms and then also come down and use part of, or if not the whole of, the one-to-one transformer there. And you'll see that as it changes the bands, I only really use it on 20, 40, 80. Occasionally I'll trip into the 160, and occasionally I'll push it into 10 metres, but I haven't had very much success on 10 metres. I've had some success on 160 metres, particularly when the other station is particularly strong. But you'll see there that the actual current distribution changes according to the band, and that changes the reactance down at the feed point. There's been some discussion about whether or not to use a balun on these. The general consensus is that you probably don't need a balun on it if you're running with a antenna matching unit. And as I said, I use an ugly balun right at the radio end, but I just use the antenna matching unit to do the best I can on getting a SWR of 1-to-1, and it actually will tune up quite nicely. It'll certainly, as a general rule, it will tune up less than 1.5 to 1, and I've tuned them down to 1.2, 1.1, 1.0 to 1, depending upon the ground, depending upon the height above the ground level, and also how the temperature is performing. So for those who are a bit interested in the theory, there's a bit of a difference on which band you're operating on. Typically on the 80 metre band, on this band, each half of the flat top plus some of the leg. So you see that it's not operating on the full of the leg, it's operating on part of the leg on the matching section, which is the open feed black wire that you saw on the example that's going around at the moment. Forms a shortening or slightly folded up half wave dipole. The rest of the matching section acts as an unwanted but unavoidable reactance. There you go. So because of the way it's set up, there is reactance built into this antenna between the electrical centre of the dipole and the feeder to the antenna matching unit. On the other hand, you've got the 40 metre operation, the flat top or horizontal section plus 16 feet or 4.87 metres, remembering that the leg is about 10.1 metres in length, so roughly about half the leg is being used and now functions as a partially fold up 2 half wave in phase antenna, producing polar diagram with somewhat sharper lobe pattern. So really the directionality though of this antenna on all the bands that I've operated on is almost close to omnidirectional. It's not really a directional antenna at all. It has some directionality about it, and you'll see there that on 40 metres there is a bit of directionality about it. And this is 20 metres, and this is the original design for the G5RV. And it says there, at this frequency, the conditions are ideal. So this is how the antenna was designed to operate on predominantly 20 metres.
Yeah, did you say you have trouble with it on 20?
Personally, I haven't had great success on 20, which is a little bit, it's a little bit surprising. But I also put that down to just where I'm operating from. So I operate out near Crookwell, out near Goulburn. So it's sort of central west. So
Varney originally, was he operating sort of in London or somewhere?
yeah, he's a UK guy.
Yeah, I knew he was there, obviously
Yeah.
from his call, but he was a city boy, yeah?
Yeah, he was a city boy.
So it's like a small backyard. Yeah.
And that's why he designed it.
Yep.
Yeah, so he was in signals in the Second World War, and when he came home, needed an antenna that he could operate, and his backyard was basically 30 metres. So that was the whole reason for it, because he needed something that could operate in very limited area. And 30 metres would cover many houses, but if you're living in a unit, I'm not sure how you're going to do that. But even so, sorry,
Alex Luke.
Alex Loop. It's horses for courses. John, yeah,
That very nicely made example you had there, what brand is that?
that's an Oasis. That one. Yeah, I got that. Actually found it in my antenna box, but just before I came out, and I thought, that's good. Because most of my antennas, my G5RVs, have had fairly hard lives, and they tend to get run over by mowers, by things like that. Trees fall on them and so on. So most of them are in basic condition. But yeah, that's an Oasis. VK4 Ice used to make them, but I don't think he's making any now. But I used to have quite a few of those. MFJ, of course, still is manufacturing them. I've got a couple of MFJs out at the farm, or out at the contesting site, shall we say, and they run fine. They're a little bit more cost conscious, I think, on their production, but it's also horses for courses. But these antennas, they're not expensive. They're $150, $200. I'd guess that one sitting over there is probably about $200. If you want to buy it ready-made. I'm not game enough to make the antennas. I made a couple in the early days with very limited success, so I just thought, forget it. Let's just go back to playing with radios, and I've been buying ready-made ones. But look, they're good. You can get them more. They're more expensive if you want them, but I wouldn't be paying much more than $200 for them. And I think the MFJs are sort of sitting around the 140, 150 marks.
And shock horror, you can make them.
Yeah, as I said, I tried.
Not real easy to get that ladder line these days.
Oh no, the ladder line. Well, the ladder line doesn't matter what you use. Actually, the ladder line you can actually use open line. You don't have to use ladder line on it, because the ladder line itself doesn't add to the impedance of the antenna.
It's just need balanced, yeah.
No, you just use the separators.
That's right, it's balanced line.
Yeah, it's a balanced line, correct. So any balanced line will work. You can use 300 ohm TV cable, 450 ohms, 600 ohm, or just two pieces of wire separated by pegs. So it's not critical. I would make sure the length was correct though. So the deployment is that it's going to be flat topped, inverted, zigzag, get as high as possible. Make sure it's clear of as many pieces of metal as possible. But again, it's not that critical. It's a very forgiving antenna. I've had it, unfortunately, close to metal sheds. I've had it close to metal roofs. Well, the part of the legs anyway. And I haven't had too many problems with it. It doesn't seem to impact on the operation too much. It's good for DX. There we are, you use open wire feed, low loss. Spoken about Balin. We spoke about directionality, the ease of transport. As you see, you can just throw it in a bag and carry it around anywhere that you like. The important thing is to look after the antenna once you pull it down. So running contests, I'm always putting them up, always pulling them down. And that means making sure you wrap up the legs so that they're in a coil together, and then wrap up the open wire feed, so that they're all wrapped up, they're all together, and so that next time you come to do the contesting thing, it's easy just to open it up, put it up in the tree, and you're off and running again. They don't take that long to tidy up. Effective bands and wide band coverage. It is actually quite an efficient antenna on the whole range of bands that's operating on. How am I going for time, Al?
Fine.
I'm fine.
Another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes. I can keep gibbering. Geographical coverage, as I said, VK, ZL, not a problem. And if the wind's blowing right, you can even get it further afield. On transmit, that is. Receive, receive, it's fantastic if you're just doing receive. I've picked up, particularly in the mornings, of some of our contests. The overseas contests are all running quite. You can hear a lot of the Europeans, the Asian stations, the Americans, without too much difficulty, but getting a signal over there is really quite tough. Partly because their contests are all high power as compared to what we've got, but also it's a big ask for a basic antenna like this, which is non-directional, to get to Europe or many parts of Asia. But as I said, I was in the All Asian DX contest a couple of years ago, I think it was now, and I managed to get a few stations in, so I wasn't embarrassed by it. And that was just using, I think I was using the IC7000, the ICOM, or it would have been the Yaesu FT897D, 100 watts maximum, so I would have been transmitting on something like 70 or 80 watts, and I managed to get a few contacts in there. Methods of erection, how you get up into the trees is your business. So in the early days, I used a slightly less than legal cannon gun, which homemade, which fired a great tennis ball right up into the trees, 30 metres easy. This thing was dangerous as. Now, in my more reformed years, I'm now using basically bow and arrow to get up into the trees.
It's much more legal.
Yeah, it does have a higher level of legality. You're quite correct there. Proximity to the ground we've spoken about. Digital, okay, it handles digital without too much trouble. I haven't done a lot of digital, but I have used it on digital, and I've had no problems with using it on digital. EMR, right, well, EMR is not such a big problem on these antennas because they're 10 metres up in the air. I think on the radiations that I was working on, you needed at least 5 to 7 metres clearance away from the antenna to be operating it safely. Being 10 metres up in the air, generally speaking, it's not a problem. I wouldn't get too close to it though. I wouldn't walk straight underneath it when operating it. But there again, because I'm a single operator, I'm usually not operating and walking underneath the antenna at the same time. So in summary, great 20 metre DX antenna for small backyards. Performs well if installed as recommended. Work with an ATU and you can work basically all bands 10 to 160 metres if you want. However, it is very much compromised. I'll leave it at that. Any questions, comments, notations, corrections? Yes.
Yes, two
Two.
questions.
Yep.
The first one being, when you erected vertically, was it exactly vertical, or was there a plus minus 10% to the vertical direction?
I've never put it up vertically. To put it up over 30 metres in the air vertically would be a bit of a tall order. I mean, there's no reason why you can't do it.
So you had a horizontal component?
It's always been horizontal for me, or inverted V.
Okay, so that said, how far to the horizontal were you theoretically?
The top of the centre feed, the centre of the antenna needs to be at least 10 metres and preferably higher. So 10 metres is halfway for 20 metres.
Right, yeah. But in terms of, okay, so you take that fan and build it towards the horizontal, is it 45 degrees?
You're talking about the inverted V?
The inverted V, but you're not going fully vertical, you're going toward the horizontal. Is it at 45 degrees?
The legs, the dog leg.
The two, the dipod, yeah, of each end.
I've operated them at different. I'm not sure I understand totally.
You've got to look at it 3D. So,
Yeah.
so that's 0 degrees.
That's the way you've got the antenna and inverted V.
So if you bring it up to 45, 90 degrees, that's
Like that?
Yes.
Yep.
Correct. So where have you placed your two ends? Is it 45 degrees to the horizontal? So you actually shoot.
Basically, I put them at the same geographic plane.
Oh, so you're looking at 0 degrees.
0 degrees dog leg. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So an inverted V, but horizontal inverted V instead of inverted.
It's from that.
Yeah.
From that center point.
From the centre point.
Oh,
That's
okay.
right.
All right then.
Yes.
And the second, have you varied that and have you gone,
Absolutely.
and where are the results being optimised?
Optimise? I don't think you optimise on a G5 RV. It just works. It doesn't seem to impact on the gain of the antenna. As I said, I've worked at 90 degrees on the same plane, and it seems to work fine. I've worked at almost 90 degrees in inverted V. Wouldn't be 90 degrees, it'd be close. It'd be somewhere like that.
Okay.
And it doesn't seem to impact. I've worked at dogleg as well.
Okay.
So one of the arms dog-legged, because I had to wrap it around a tree somewhere. I couldn't get.
The second part, or not part, but the second question would be digital mode. Is this at on FTA or whether it's Whisper? I assume one of those modes. But that said, where is that signal taken?
Okay. Digital I'm not so strong on because I haven't used it so much on digital. I did experiment with it on digital. Now, that was, where I was experimenting was pretty low and the ground was quite damp and it wasn't overly successful. And as I said, I think the moon saw more of that signal than anywhere else would have seen on flat Earth. So I think most of in that case, because I think I was using a 6 metre mast at the time, so it was very difficult. And the terrain the area that I was in when I was doing the digital experimentations was not good. It was not ideal. So I had to actually bend the arms around a few things. So I wasn't successful. I did have success, but I can't on 20 metres. But I can't say that I was overly successful with it.
Oh, to be continued.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Just, I'm actually puzzled about your problems at 20 metres, given the design of this thing.
Yeah.
What were you using as a reference? Was there somebody else working 20 metres on a different antenna and just blazing away and you were getting nothing? Or?
No, contesting. I was using it for contesting. So on contesting, primarily, obviously, I'm using it in 40 metres during the day, 80 metres at night. But then playing around with 20 metres both during the day and night to see what I could get.
But others were having success using other...
Oh, yeah.
So it wasn't
I was
just
deaf. I was completely deaf.
That's interesting.
It is. It is. I mean, it's not like I've never had a 20-metre contact, but I don't know. It just didn't seem to work for me. And you know, today's talk is really on a practical approach. So the practice is that I've had a lot of difficulty with
It wasn't the radio, was it?
I could have been. Oh, that wouldn't surprise me. But having said that, I've got two FT897Ds and an IC7000. So if one radio could have been a problem, but all three radios seem probably not so likely. I think it's more the location. All right, if there's no further questions, I will let it go. Thank
you very much.
for your attention.